I had always been fascinated by abandoned places, so when I heard about the old asylum on the outskirts of town, I knew I had to explore it. The asylum had been closed for decades, left to decay and be reclaimed by nature. Rumors of hauntings and strange occurrences only fueled my curiosity. One crisp autumn afternoon, I decided to visit the asylum. Armed with a flashlight and my camera, I made my way through the overgrown path that led to the entrance. The building loomed ahead, its windows shattered and its walls covered in ivy. As I stepped inside, the air grew colder, and an eerie silence enveloped me. The interior was a maze of dark hallways and empty rooms. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floor was littered with debris. I wandered through the corridors, taking pictures and marveling at the eerie beauty of the place. But as the sun began to set, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. I reached the main hall, where I found an old, rusted wheelchair. As I examined it, I heard a faint whisper. I turned around, but there was no one there. My heart pounded as I continued to hear the whispers, growing louder and more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the basement. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I found a staircase leading down to the basement and descended into the darkness. The air was damp and musty, and the whispers grew louder with each step. I reached the bottom and found myself in a long, narrow hallway lined with old patient rooms. As I walked down the hallway, I felt a cold breeze brush past me. The whispers were now clear, and I could make out words, pleas for help, cries of pain. I reached the last room and pushed open the door. Inside, I saw a figure huddled in the corner, shrouded in darkness. I shone my flashlight on the figure, and it turned to face me. It was a woman, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She reached out to me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty room. I wanted to run, but I was rooted to the spot. The woman began to move towards me, her movements slow and deliberate. I could see the pain and desperation in her eyes. "Please, help me," she repeated. Summoning all my courage, I asked her how I could help. She pointed to a small, hidden door at the back of the room. I opened it and found a narrow passageway leading to a hidden chamber. Inside, I discovered old medical records and journals detailing the horrific experiments conducted on the patients. The woman appeared beside me, her expression one of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, before fading away into the darkness. I realized that she had been trapped in the asylum, her spirit unable to rest until the truth was uncovered. I left the asylum, my mind racing with what I had experienced. I shared the story and the evidence I found, bringing to light the dark history of the asylum. The woman's spirit was finally at peace, and the whispers ceased. But I will never forget the haunting eyes of the woman in the asylum, and the chilling whispers that led me to uncover the truth. I had always been a skeptic, never one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. But that all changed when I moved into the old house on Elm Street. It was a charming, Victorian-era home with creaky floors and an eerie history. The locals warned me about the house, but I brushed off their superstitions. I was excited to start fresh in a new place. The first few nights were uneventful, but then strange things began to happen. It started with whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to come from the walls, echoing through the empty halls. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably sinister. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and they were coming from the attic. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the narrow staircase. The attic was cold and filled with old, dusty furniture covered in white sheets. I shone the flashlight around, but there was no one there. Just as I was about to leave, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the corner, watching me. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure didn't move, but the whispers grew louder, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. I stumbled back, tripping over a box and falling to the floor. When I looked up, the figure was gone, but the whispers remained. Over the next few days, the activity in the house intensified. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the whispers followed me everywhere. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think. I was being haunted, and I didn't know why. Desperate for answers, I began researching the history of the house. I discovered that it had once belonged to a man named Thomas Blackwood, who had been accused of witchcraft and executed in the late 1800s. Legend had it that his spirit still roamed the house, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to live there. One night, I decided to confront the spirit. I gathered my courage and went to the attic, where I had first seen the shadowy figure. I called out to Thomas, demanding to know why he was haunting me. The whispers grew louder, and the temperature dropped. Suddenly, the figure appeared again, but this time it was closer, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Leave this place," it hissed. "Or suffer the same fate as those before you." I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, and I screamed, running out of the attic and down the stairs. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath. I knew then that I had to leave the house. I packed my things and moved out the next day, never looking back. To this day, I can still hear the whispers in my dreams, reminding me of the terror I faced in that house. I don't know if Thomas Blackwood's spirit still haunts Elm Street, but I do know one thing: I will never doubt the existence of the supernatural again. It all started with the feeling of being watched. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. I had recently moved into a new apartment in the city, and everything was unfamiliar. But the feeling persisted, gnawing at the back of my mind. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I noticed a man standing across the street. He was wearing a dark hoodie, and his face was obscured by the shadows. I brushed it off as a coincidence, but the next day, he was there again. And the day after that. I started to see him everywhere, outside my apartment, near my office, even at the grocery store. He never approached me, never spoke, but his presence was always there, lurking in the background. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. One night, I received a text message from an unknown number. It simply said, "I see you." My heart raced as I looked around my apartment, but there was no one there. I called the police, but without any concrete evidence, there was little they could do. The messages continued, each one more unsettling than the last. "You look beautiful tonight. I love the way you smile. I'm closer than you think." I felt like I was losing my mind, constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to sleep or eat. I decided to install security cameras around my apartment. I needed proof, something to show the police. The first few nights, the footage showed nothing unusual. But then, one night, I saw him. The man in the hoodie was standing outside my window, staring in. He stood there for hours, watching me as I slept. I showed the footage to the police, and they finally took my case seriously. They advised me to stay with a friend while they investigated. I packed a bag and left my apartment, hoping to find some peace. But the messages followed me. "You can't hide from me. I know where you are." I felt trapped, like there was no escape. The police increased their patrols around my friend's house, but the man always seemed to be one step ahead. One night, I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I could hear footsteps approaching, and I knew he was inside the house. I locked myself in the bathroom, praying the police would arrive in time. The door handle rattled, and I heard his voice for the first time. "You can't hide from me," he whispered. "I will always find you." I held my breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The sound of sirens filled the air, and the footsteps retreated. The police arrived just in time, but the man had vanished. They searched the area but found no trace of him. I moved to a new city, changed my phone number, and tried to rebuild my life. But the fear never left me. I still look over my shoulder, still check my phone for messages. The watcher may be gone, but his presence lingers, a constant reminder of the terror I endured. It was supposed to be a routine hike. I had done it countless times before, navigating the familiar trails of the Rocky Mountains. The weather was perfect, the sky a brilliant blue, and the air crisp and refreshing. I felt invincible, ready to conquer the world. As I reached the summit, I took a moment to admire the breathtaking view. The vast expanse of mountains stretched out before me, a sea of green and gray. I decided to take a different route down, one that I had never explored before. It seemed like a good idea at the time, an opportunity for adventure. The trail started off easy enough, but soon it became steeper and more treacherous. Loose rocks and narrow ledges made every step a challenge. I was careful, but one misstep was all it took. My foot slipped, and I tumbled down the rocky slope, unable to stop myself. I landed hard, pain shooting through my body. I tried to move, but my leg was pinned under a large rock. Panic set in as I realized I was alone, miles from help, with no cell service. I screamed for help, but the only response was the echo of my own voice. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. The temperature dropped, and I felt the cold seeping into my bones. I knew I had to stay awake, but exhaustion was taking over. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, and that's when I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the darkness. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned hiking gear. He looked at me with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "You need to stay awake," he said softly. "Help is on the way." His presence was comforting, and I felt a surge of hope. I forced myself to stay conscious, focusing on the man's words. He stayed with me, talking to me, keeping me alert. I don't know how long it was before I heard the distant sound of voices and the crunch of footsteps on the gravel. Rescue workers appeared, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They lifted the rock off my leg and carried me to safety. As they loaded me into the helicopter, I looked back to thank the man who had kept me company. But he was gone, vanished into the night. In the hospital, I learned that I had been found just in time. My leg was broken, and I had suffered from hypothermia, but I would recover. I told the rescue team about the man who had stayed with me, but they insisted that no one else had been on the mountain that day. I don't know who or what he was, a guardian angel, a figment of my imagination, or something else entirely. But I do know that he saved my life. That near-death experience changed me, made me appreciate every moment, and reminded me that sometimes, help comes from the most unexpected places. It was a quiet evening, and I was home alone, enjoying a rare night of solitude. My husband was out of town on a business trip, and our kids were staying with their grandparents. I decided to take advantage of the peace and relax with a good book and a glass of wine. As the night wore on, I started to feel uneasy. It was a feeling I couldn't quite shake, like I was being watched. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the sensation grew stronger. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, reassuring myself that everything was secure. I was about to head to bed when I heard a noise coming from the backyard. It was a faint rustling, like someone was moving through the bushes. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but before I could hit send, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled for a flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but it did little to calm my nerves. I heard the sound again, closer this time, and I knew I wasn't alone. I crept to the kitchen, where I kept a small knife for protection. As I reached for the knife, I saw a shadow move across the window. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, hoping whoever was out there wouldn't see me. But then, the back door creaked open, and I knew I had to act. I ran to the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I hid behind the couch, clutching the knife, trying to steady my breathing. The footsteps grew louder, and I knew the intruder was in the room with me. I peeked out from behind the couch and saw him, a tall, menacing figure dressed in black, his face obscured by a mask. He moved with a terrifying calmness, as if he had all the time in the world. I knew I had to get out of the house, but the front door was too far away. Summoning all my courage, I made a dash for the back door. The intruder saw me and lunged, but I managed to slip past him. I ran into the backyard, my only thought to get as far away as possible. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps pounding on the grass. I reached the fence and scrambled over it, cutting my hands on the rough wood. I ran to my neighbor's house, pounding on the door and screaming for help. The lights came on, and my neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, opened the door, her eyes wide with fear. She let me in and locked the door behind me. We called the police, and they arrived within minutes. They searched my house and the surrounding area but found no trace of the intruder. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The police assured me they would increase patrols in the neighborhood, but I knew I would never feel safe in that house again. The memory of that night, the terror I felt, and the image of the masked intruder haunted me for months. I eventually moved to a new home, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. But the fear never truly left me. I still check the locks obsessively, still jump at every noise in the night. That near-death experience changed me, made me realize how fragile our sense of security can be. I glance at my watch. It's 11:45 p.m., and the last train home is due any minute. The station is eerily quiet, the only sound being the distant hum of the city. I shiver, pulling my coat tighter around me as a cold breeze sweeps through the platform. The train arrives, its brakes screeching like a banshee. I step inside, noticing the carriage is almost empty except for a few scattered passengers. I find a seat near the middle, away from the flickering lights at the ends of the carriage. As the train lurches forward, I pull out my phone to pass the time. The signal is weak, and my messages won't send. I sigh and look around. The other passengers seem off. A man in a trench coat stares blankly ahead, a woman clutches her bag tightly, and an elderly lady mutters to herself. The train enters a tunnel, and the lights flicker more violently. Suddenly, the train jerks to a halt. The lights go out completely, plunging the carriage into darkness. I hear whispers, soft and unintelligible, growing louder and more frantic. My phone's flashlight barely cuts through the darkness. I see shadows moving, but the other passengers remain eerily still. Panic sets in as the whispers turn into screams. I try to move, but my body feels heavy, as if something is holding me down. The lights flicker back on, and the train starts moving again. The passengers are gone. The seats are empty, and the carriage is silent. I stand up, heart pounding, and make my way to the door. It's locked. I pound on it, but no one responds. The train stops at the next station. The doors finally open, and I stumble out, gasping for air. I look back at the train, but it's already pulling away, disappearing into the darkness. I never take the last train home again. I had always been fascinated by old, antique shops. There was something about the history and mystery behind each item that drew me in. One rainy afternoon, I stumbled upon a small, dusty shop tucked away in a narrow alley. The sign above the door read, "Curiosities and Oddities." Inside, the shop was dimly lit, filled with an assortment of strange and intriguing items. My eyes were immediately drawn to an ornate, full-length mirror in the corner. Its frame was intricately carved with strange symbols and figures. I felt an inexplicable urge to buy it. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with piercing blue eyes, warned me. "This mirror has a dark history," he said. "Many have claimed to see things that aren't there. Be careful." I brushed off his warning, thinking it was just a sales tactic. I took the mirror home and placed it in my bedroom. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something odd. My reflection seemed delayed. It was subtle, but there was a slight lag between my movements and the reflection. I chalked it up to my imagination and went to sleep. But over the next few nights, the strange occurrences became more frequent. I would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. One night, I woke up to a cold breeze in my room. The window was closed, but the mirror was fogged up, as if someone had been breathing on it. I wiped the glass, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing behind me in the reflection. I spun around, but the room was empty. Terrified, I decided to cover the mirror with a sheet. But the next morning, the sheet was on the floor, and the mirror was uncovered. I knew I had to get rid of it. I took the mirror back to the shop, but the shopkeeper was gone, and the shop was empty. Desperate, I left the mirror on the curb and drove away. That night, I felt a sense of relief, thinking it was all over. But as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint whisper. "You can't escape." I opened my eyes, and there, at the foot of my bed, was the mirror. My reflection smiled, but I wasn't smiling. I had always loved hiking, especially in the serene, untouched parts of the forest. One weekend, I decided to explore a new trail that a friend had recommended. It was supposed to be beautiful and less traveled. Perfect for some solitude. The trail started off easy, winding through tall trees and lush greenery. The air was fresh, and the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. As I ventured deeper, the path became narrower and the forest denser. The sunlight barely pierced through the thick canopy above. After a couple of hours, I reached a clearing with an old, abandoned cabin in the center. Curious, I approached it. The door creaked open with a gentle push, revealing a dusty interior. It looked like no one had been there for years. I decided to take a break and eat my lunch inside. As I sat there, I heard faint whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew louder and more distinct. They seemed to be coming from the woods surrounding the cabin. I stepped outside, trying to make out the words, but they were in a language I couldn't understand. A chill ran down my spine. I decided it was time to head back. As I retraced my steps, the whispers followed me, growing more insistent. The forest, which had felt so welcoming earlier, now seemed menacing. The trees loomed over me, and the path seemed to twist and turn in ways I didn't remember. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. The whispers were now all around me, echoing through the trees. I stumbled upon a small stream and decided to follow it, hoping it would lead me back to the main trail. The whispers grew louder, almost as if they were trying to drown out my thoughts. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw a figure standing by the stream. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her face pale and eyes hollow. She raised a finger to her lips, signaling for silence, and then pointed downstream. I followed her direction, and soon enough, I found myself back on the main trail. I turned to thank her, but she was gone. The whispers had stopped, and the forest was silent once more. I hurried back to my car, vowing never to return to those woods again. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the woman standing at the edge of the forest, watching me leave.